identify your stakeholders. Yes. So, and especially how the set of stakeholders changes with the change of product life cycle. So who are stakeholders? What was your experience with the stakeholders on the very early stages of your businesses and startups, and how do they change with the product life cycle? So I think we'll start with Paris. So Scott.
All right. Well, I'll share my examples from the QuickBooks France experience. So when I joined, we had 15 people in the business, very small product team, larger marketing and sales. And so I think the trick, whether you're in startup mode or even within a large organization, is first identifying your stakeholders, like you mentioned. But one thing that I think is a step further that's critical is understanding who the decision maker is, who's driving, who's approving, the old-fashioned DACI, the DACI, who's contributing and who is to be informed. And what I found is through the life cycle of being, at 15 people, now over 80 in the office, often the decisions that drag on and take the longest to make are ones where we hadn't identified clear approvers. So if you don't know who's the one that's actually going to make that end decision, you end up trying to get everybody, and that takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and in the end, it's like you've created a democracy within your organization. And then finally, you realize there's somebody named Susan in California that is making the decision. You're like, we haven't talked to Susan. We should probably talk to Susan. And so I share that example that when you talk about identifying stakeholders, I think it's critical to then understand the role of each of these stakeholders. And once you identify who the approver is, it helps accelerate that decision-making process.
Great. And maybe you can share some tips and tricks in really identifying and understanding who is the real decision maker, because of course it seems logical that like a higher management position gives you more decision making forces, but it doesn't always work like this. So it would be great to hear from your experience, really, how do you identify them? How you really understand who's the formal or informal leader and who makes the real decisions?
Yeah, it's a great question. We always joke that there's a line where you say you look for the cat in the meeting, and there's people who are super warm and friendly, and there are people who are more like cats, who are more analytical and sit back and you see where the eyes are going in the room. That's kind of like in a meeting situation. We always joke that that's the way you can see who really holds power. But more seriously, I think at Intuit, which is an amazing company, centralized in the States but around the world, it's a very friendly culture, and that is great for work. But it also makes it really tricky because that, again, I mentioned that consensus is very challenging because you feel like this obligation to get everybody aligned before you make a decision. And when we're a startup in France, but part of a bigger company, often things we need to be approved by someone in a different country, or they're approved by someone in the country where we're at. And so often what that boils down to is two things. One is understanding with the initial group, what's the decision that needs to be made? And then two, actually writing out that DACI and putting names on it and then sending it out and testing it out. And then you can quickly see if people say, hey, whoa, that's not their job. This is a bigger issue because it involves these central teams and dependencies. As soon as we get it in writing, that feels like it accelerates that decision-making process. But it starts with knowing what the decision is that has to be made, taking your best guess at who you think should be in the room and who the approver is. And then getting it on paper and testing it out. And you'll either realize, yeah, we're good to go, we're autonomous, we can move fast, or you realize that you're going to have to scale up a bit more with who you need to influence, who you need to bring into the conversations.
Oh, sounds great. Thanks. Anthony, what about your experience in identifying stakeholders?
Yeah, I think...
and some tips and tricks.
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing I'd like to say is, when you talk about stakeholders, I like to put them into two buckets at the highest level, which is, your internal stakeholders and your external stakeholders. So when you talk about external stakeholders, from a product management perspective, you're essentially talking about your customers, the people who you're building the product for and who you're delivering value to. But many a times where there are issues and challenges and difficulties for a product manager is within your internal stakeholders, because, as a product manager, you work directly with a lot of people. It's all about relationship management, and you can influence people, right? So when we talk about internal stakeholders, they range from people like, your direct product team, so which is your engineers, your QA team, designers, or your leadership team or your management team, those who, quote unquote, write the check, right, or determine the direction of the business. And also you have people like sales, who are out in the field trying to figure out how to sell the products, getting information from you from a competition perspective, and people like marketing, right? So there's a lot of people that you have to manage. And so you have to be strategic in how you work with these people, because everybody has a different thing they are trying to get from the product, so, and they can also influence the product, in different ways. So a salesperson is probably telling a product manager that, hey, we need to build this feature because our competition is doing it, right? Marketing is telling you, that, hey, I need information or data to be able to develop my marketing collateral, right? Or your engineers are asking you questions about technical debt and architectural decisions and the like, So it's very easy as a product manager to get stuck in all of these requests and demands. And so you have to be able to, communicate effectively, right? So communication is very key, when working with stakeholders, right? Because you have to manage these people, you have to manage their expectations, right? And let them know that, hey, we are all on the same page. We're trying to make sure that we deliver value to our customers. But sometimes, it doesn't come out like that. It looks like, there's some politics that might be going on because this person wants to, push their agenda, or this person on the leadership team thinks things are moving too slow. We need to get this product out there faster, So I think at the highest level, once you look at your product and see who, touches your product in different ways, that's the first step, right? And then the second thing I would say is that, how do you want to communicate to these people? Because it's different, right? The language you speak to the sales team might not be the language you speak to your leadership team. So figure out, what works best for people. And then there's the personal connection you have, right? We're all delivering products, we're all fighting fires, we're trying to hit revenue targets, but there's the one-on-one, personal connection that is important, right? And as product managers, we see a lot of times that we need to empathize with our customer, but we also need to empathize with our stakeholders, right? Understand where they're coming from, ask questions, and clarify things, because you don't want to make assumptions. A lot of times, you thought you heard something and you go ahead and deliver something different, and it jeopardizes, the whole vision of the product, So I think, at the end of the day, being able to communicate effectively is important. And then from, you spoke about the life cycle of the product, who do you talk to, So it depends, because if you're looking at a product that it's in its very early stages of, maybe you're still trying to research what to build or determine how you're going to penetrate a certain market, you're probably talking to, people like your engineering team, your user research team, because it's still very early in the life cycle of the product, right? But when you get to things like launch, then you have to go to people like marketing to figure out, okay, how do we go to market? What market do we target? And how do we develop collateral or marketing materials that can help us define what the product can do, its limitation and the scopes, right? Also, in the final stages, maybe when your product has been launched, it's in the market, you want to work with maybe your data science team to see how, data is working in terms of, are we doing well in the market? Are the features being used? Are some features being used against the other? Also, sometimes in the later stages of the product life cycle, you can work with sales, right? The product is launched, and maybe your customers think it's too expensive, or they don't like certain features, right? So that's when you can work with the sales team to gather that feedback, gather that data, and see how you can iterate upon the product. So I think what I like to do personally is map out really physically my stakeholders and see how I can define what their wants and their needs are, and over time I can change based on where we are in the life cycle of the product.
Great. Thank you very much for those insights. I have just maybe one question. So
Sure.
I like very much the idea which you emphasized on about building personal relationship and understanding that, of course, we are building a great product. Of course, we are a business. We are like everybody focusing on our goals and so on. But anyway, we are people. And I want you just maybe a little bit to tell more the story or some examples or something from your experience about really how building great relationship with people, with your stakeholders, can really help the whole team, the whole business to build the amazing product.
Yeah. So like I said earlier on, a lot of product managers, we might not have direct reports, or we might not be, we're working with these people who don't report to us, but you want to be able to influence people, right? And so in as much as, we have a day-to-day job, fighting fires and trying to deliver product, it's good to also develop a one-on-one relationship. So an example would be a certain time I was working with an engineer who was, my tech lead, right? And we had this deadline we were approaching for a product launch, which was coming up for a conference we were working on. And, I just noticed that, his demeanor, his way of communicating during, sprint planning and, sprint demos and the likes were a little different. Something was off, and it was also affecting his productivity. His team was not reaching the deadlines and the milestones that were defined up front. And so for me, I could have just said, what, this is something that, it doesn't make sense. You're making us, lose time and the likes. It's easy to react. But having a one-on-one relationship, if it's pulling someone into a corner and having that conversation is important, he might not be able to express himself, in the front of the product team. But what I did was pull him aside and ask, personal questions. And the idea there was for me to listen more, as opposed to trying to blame or, interrogate him or ask questions, just to get, where are you coming from? And then it was, where he expressed to me that he thought that, we were not going in the right direction as regards to the product, and I asked why, and he gave all his reasons, and so, some of them didn't make sense. I didn't agree with everything, but I did listen and I heard some of his ideas, and I said, okay, let's try different things. It might not work now for this, deadline that we're approaching, but in the future, as a roadmap item, I would like to add this to the roadmap, So that's the example with the tech lead, but it could be any member of any team member, right? And so once you learn to work with people, you also need to look at the whole picture, right? Not just the product in front of you you're trying to deliver. And that's why I'm using the word empathy, right? We say product managers should empathize a lot, but not just for your customers. You also should empathize for your internal stakeholders and your team members.
Yeah, and I think that this is just such a simple approach, but such an important approach, is to listen to the people you're working with. Nevertheless, those are customers or users or business side or management or your tech lead, which is this very tired, trying to hit the deadlines of your roadmap. Cool. Thanks very much for sharing this experience. Pete, what about you? What about your experience in identifying stakeholders, and how do they differ in your case, in your business, different life cycles of the product, of the projects you're handling?
Okay, let me bring a new shade into that story, because having limited experience with project management, I can really share my general experience with in respect of how we are dealing with our projects internally, and what are our own company specific challenges. So one of our big challenge, as I mentioned, we are a relatively small insurance company operating in 7 Central and Eastern European countries, namely Ukraine, Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Romania. And 7 different countries means 7 different jurisdictions, 7 different languages, 7 different regulators, regulations, 7 different currencies, and most importantly, 7 different mindsets. So we are a slim organization, and we are not building hierarchies, but still it is very, very challenging and demanding for us to manage our companies and to achieve really results. The main reason for that that all markets are separately simply too small on their own, and if we want to do something new and reach break-even over a reasonable period of time, then we need to cooperate and join our efforts. our companies are built up in a way that we share pain and gain, but finding common ground, even in case of smaller projects, is extremely challenging.
Mm-hmm.
It can work only if you have the right colleagues at the right place. They must be open-minded enough and with willingness to create value for our customers, for our shareholders, and for ourselves, of course. We can be successful only if we have the buy-in and commitment of the colleagues, and their main driver is really their own belief that we are doing the right thing, instead of being driven only by the instruction given by their managers. So if we can involve them and make them a valuable part of a project, then the likelihood of success will be much higher than if they are not part of the story.
Peter, I want here to ask you to give a little bit more insights about this topic of, let's call it cross-cultural or cross-country communication and management, because I think that all of us have the experience in working with different countries, different cultures, and especially for me, for example, it's always a challenge because your communication, you're managing different stakeholders depending whether it's somebody from the United States, from Europe, or from United Arab Emirates. It really differs, and you need always to take into consideration this cultural difference. So from your experience, and as far as I understand, this is one of the things you're constantly working on and you're constantly involved in. So what are the main challenges and how do you cope them? How do you overcome them?
Yeah. So creating really a unified corporate culture and having the same values everywhere is something we are really pursuing within our company. Especially within the European Union. So our company is really built on two acquisitions when we really needed to merge two completely different corporate culture into a new one. And you can imagine that it hasn't been an easy ride, and it is still it is still ongoing, and it still requires actually daily effort on that. What we're trying to achieve within our organization is really that we would like to make the change part of our business, a part of our changes should become business as usual for our company. We try to condition our organization to that, and whenever we are really so we are not talking about changes whenever we need to improve ourselves. So we are rather talking about why we need to improve ourselves and to improve ourselves. And if your teams are open-minded and flexible enough, you can get their buy-in. Then you can really forge virtue out of the necessity, and together you can turn the situation to our benefit. And answering your question is really, for us, it is all about people. So having the right people at the right place with the buy-in and really the willingness to create some value, it is the key. Otherwise, you will fail or you will perform much poorer than you wanted to originally.
Yeah, having the right people in the right place, I think it's the dream of every product or project manager.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Peter. So the next question, so as far as I understand, all of you have had experience both with smaller organizations, startups, and bigger organizations. So it would be great to hear from your experience the difference between managing stakeholders in startups and larger enterprises. So the key differences and how to cope with those key challenges you face both in startups and in enterprises managing your stakeholders. Scott, maybe let's start from you.
Sure. The main difference I see between my experience at Intuit in California and the experience here in France is, from a product perspective, is the presence of the go-to-market side. So when Anthony was talking about managing empathy for customers, but also empathy for the business, we've had to switch that focus and spend a lot of time having empathy on what the business needs are. And that's where a lot of the challenges have come and the experience here. When I was working in Mountain View, California, I had to fly to a different state to sit next to a customer service agent. I'd never met a salesperson except for, I guess, the sales executive, executive vice president of sales who I saw in the hallways, but didn't see the sales team, rarely interacted with marketing. And it was really just the triad of engineers, designers, and product managers. And so we were very isolated and could spend our focus on, okay, what do the customers need? What do the customers need? And now in this French experience, it's a shift, which is, hey, we won't be around in a year if we don't increase our subscriptions or if we increase our revenue, and so you start getting exposed to these business needs that are really critical, especially in the startup phase where go-to-market is a lot more present. And so that's kind of one difference that I've seen from a very product-driven, product-based company like Intuit, is that you're very focused on the customer and a little bit isolated from the business. And then when you come to the smaller startup experience, it's much more that business side. And maybe one other thing that I would add is one thing that's worked, because if you're constantly trying to get feedback from customers and you're getting feedback from customer support, sales, marketing, and those other organizations, like Anthony said, you can be torn between a ton of different initiatives and you're kind of at the center and you'll end up being very spread thin. And so one thing that's helped a lot is to get the alignment on what are the two critical things that we as a startup or as we as a business unit are trying to accomplish. And once we got that alignment with the go-to-market side and the product side, we said, okay, great. We will do all we can to understand those customer pains that will move the needle on retention or move the needle on product recommendation score or on active use. It's when you line kind of high level metrics, it really frees the team to be able to go and then focus on customers. And of course, using data, we're able to then make the best decisions to have the biggest impact. So that's what I would say. In answer to that is, it definitely depends on what group part you're in the organization.
Right.
But I find that here, there's a lot more pull from the business side because there's that urgency. And we've got to find that balance by aligning on the key metrics that we want to move and then protecting the team to go and do their best work.
Great, thanks. Anthony, what about your experience? What is the main difference between building a startup and working with stakeholders there and the bigger organization?
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on what Scott said about, in a startup world, you're still trying to figure out your product market fit, right? You're still trying to figure out, for me, back in the day when I was running my startup, I was trying to figure out how do I get my next round of funding, So my key stakeholders were there, which were my immediate team, but my investors were, the top of the list, right? Because you want to make sure that, you hit those numbers or those metrics, like Scott said, for you to be able to show that, this product is going to be successful. So I think, there was some form of pressure there from, investors on, hitting your number, because if you don't, your product's going to fail, you're not going to get a next round of funding, you're not going to get customers, as opposed to our established company, or like a MasterCard or a Microsoft, where obviously you have investors, but, in your role, you might not interface with them directly. It's more about your leadership team and your management team, right? They still have the same goals of, revenue targets and the likes, but you're probably working on maybe a mature product, and so maybe the expectations are different. So when it comes to size and the stage of the company, whether it's a startup or enterprise space, it depends on the stage of the product, right? The product is doing well, it's a cash flow. Maybe you don't have to do as much because we are key in the market, we own this market, but if your product is not doing well, it's not getting adoption, revenues, you're missing your revenues, then, you get that pressure from our key investors to figure out, are we going to switch off the lights on this product, or, you know, we keep, either we iterate on this product, or we just, you know, do something else. Yeah.
Great, thanks for sharing. Pete, what about your experience in managing stakeholders in smaller and bigger organizations, in startups and enterprises?
Yeah. So unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to work for a startup. So I was always working for relatively bigger organizations. So happy to give you any comparison on that from my experience. Therefore,
okay, but then I will have the next question for you, and we'll start here from you, Pete. So one of the questions we have got from our audience is really how to emphasize your role to stakeholders. So how to show your importance, and how to show your role, and how to emphasize that you're worthy of having your ideas and working with those stakeholders. So I think in your case, in working in big organizations, it's really something you really have had experience with. So how to show your value?
So what we want to achieve, and maybe I am going to repeat myself here a bit, that we need to get the buy-in of the stakeholders. So I really need to work in team, and we need to create a working group which needs to deliver some results over a reasonable period of time. Then what I'm personally trying to achieve always to get the buy-in of the stakeholders, and this might be sometimes very, very time consuming. But this is part of our corporate culture at Colonnade, that we, as I told you, so we want really to get the people's buy-in and commitment, and we will deliver tangible results. Otherwise we will fail, or it will not work out. And as Scott said, that the switch should, or Anthony said that the light should be switched off for that particular project if it is not going like expected.
Yeah, really. Scott, Anthony, what about you? So what about your thoughts about how you should emphasize your role to stakeholders? How should you show your value, and whether it really helps in managing those stakeholders and in building great products at the end?
Maybe just add one thing to that. So like Peter was saying, when you talk about showing your value, one thing that's worked really well for us in the last couple of years' experience in France is if you can articulate the impact that you've had in the language of what matters most to those stakeholders. And so as an example, we measure PRS, product recommendation score, a score of 0 to 10, would you recommend to a friend? And one thing that we did when we were needing to get more resources was we went back and said, hey, you've trusted us in the past. Here was our focus. Here's what we did to the PRS score. We can do that again. And what we found is that told the story well enough that we had really increased the PRS, and then we could go even further. But what helped in those conversations is they actually didn't care as much about PRS, but they cared more about retention and active use and subscription. And so to translate what you're working on as your core metric, if it's PRS where you're really adding value, if you can translate that into, and now we did this in the past, it brought X% lift in conversion or X% lift in retention. And here's our plan for the future and what we can offer. People start to see you as kind of a trusted partner where they go, oh yeah, I care about retention. I care about active use. Please, if you guys can drive that, we've driven it in the past. Now with another Scrum team or with, more focus, less distraction, whatever it is, we can drive X% lift on these things that matter most to you. And I found that it takes a little more effort because it's like you got to do homework beforehand to think of and to measure the way that they measure. But when you speak in their same language of the things that matter most to them, your ability to convince increases.
Yeah, by the way, I think that we can also here highlight one more aspect of this. What's the best way to communicate negative news to the stakeholders? Because when you're telling that all our KPIs are growing, everybody loves you. But when you go and say, guys, we have a problem with our subscriptions, I think it's not so interesting for them. So Anthony, Scott, maybe from your experience, like communicating not so great news to your stakeholders, any tips and tricks for product managers?
Yeah, I can take that. So when it comes to communication, like I said earlier, it's very important, right? Because the languages, everybody's trying to achieve the same goal for the product. But like I said, there's some nuances with the language, right? Sales are talking about revenue targets. Marketing is talking about, marketing collateral, right? Mm-hmm. So when it comes to negative news, I think the first thing you need to do as a product manager, I think is effective, is for you to, if you have time, rank your stakeholders. And when I mean rank, if you look at the list of, have a list of people that you work with, and like Scott said earlier, there's the Darcy, matrix way of, ranking these people, then you know that, okay, if I need to deliver negative news to my leadership team, right, it's going to be different if I do something similar to my engineering team. And because my engineering team can say, oh, it's a bug, I'm going to fix it, and that's it, right? And they don't really have an issue with that. But if you tell your leadership team you have a bug, it's going to affect our release time, it's going to affect our revenue, they're going to react differently, right? So having a communication plan involves things like, oh, for this person that I've ranked on my list of stakeholders, I can send them an email and that's fine, right? They respond to me back with an email. For my leadership team that has expectations from a revenue perspective, I'm going to have a one-on-one meeting with them in person and relay this bad news to them and see the expression on their face and see how, we can work things out, So I think when it comes to communication with your stakeholders, even if it's good news or bad news, rank your stakeholders, know those who you have meetings with one-on-one in person, know the people you can have a meeting with as a group, right? And so that you don't have to have several meetings, because having so many meetings can also have a negative effect. And for those who you can send an email to, and, get that out of the way. So I think everyone is different depending on who you are interacting with.
Yeah. And here the empathy goes again. So anyway, you should understand whom you're talking, what these people are feeling, and so on. Guys, so we have just around 5 minutes left, and I want to have the last round of questions and answers. The last question from my side and the last round of answers from your side. So from my experience, one of the biggest challenges you do face, especially in big organizations, it's the resistance of stakeholders to change. So people do not want to change, people do not like to change, businesses do not like to change, but we all are living in such a hectic world that really we need to learn to change. And it would be great if you can, as the final point of our discussion, to share your thoughts and experience, how really to help your stakeholders to change, what to do with the resistance of those people to change, especially when it affects the business and the product results. So I think it will be the last, but still not the least important part of our discussion. Pete, maybe let's start from you.
Yeah. So for our company, so managing resistance to change is really something, but we need to deal with that on daily basis practically. Because as I mentioned, so we were our company is built on two acquisitions, and we needed to merge two corporate cultures into one. And I appreciate that for some of the people, or for a lot of people, change is causing mental stress, and they just would like to live their ordinary life without being interrupted by new things. And but this is not the way actually a company can progress. Therefore, you need to take a lot of time and energy in explaining the teams and your company and your colleagues that so we need to step further and adapt ourselves to the new external environment, because as I told you, everybody is changing around us, and either we are changing. So as personalities and
especially nowadays, yeah.
Yeah.
Changing. Yes, Scott, what about your thoughts on resistance to change?
For us at Intuit, we have a secret weapon for this. It's that customer empathy. We do these things called follow me homes, and you actually go watch customers use your software. So we actually, I did 6 last week, another few this week, and by Zoom, of course. But what we do with that is it just drives incredible empathy. And people see it with their own eyes. And then we boil it all down to a customer problem statement. And this is a document that kind of centralizes everybody around one big pain. And with that, I would say that if you need to drive change, bring these people along with you to see what you're seeing. And they'll all of a sudden be just as angry as you are. It's pretty funny because people come out of those things and be like, "Are you kidding me? This thing's been broken for how long?" I'm like, yeah, we've been saying that for the last 6 months. But as soon as they see it, it really galvanizes and drives that unity. So, and then you have that one customer problem that you're all focused on.
I'm making a note. So great idea. Thank you. Anthony, so you're the last to tell your experience so that we can have something good for the finish of our discussion.
Yeah, I was going to follow up on what Scott said. So I think one way to help when it comes to resistance is to work with sometimes the data, right? So someone might say, "Oh, we should be working on this. Why are we doing this? Or this isn't working." But when you point them to the data, sometimes that helps because you're able to see and visualize things from a quantitative perspective and say, okay, this is what the market is saying, right? This is the feature that people are using the most, right? This is what is not working, So the data is that central piece that can connect people so they can know and realize that, oh, even though we have all these ideas in our head, the data says otherwise. But also you have to also realize that, you don't want to always only rely on data because sometimes the data might not be accurate, right? So sometimes it's good to refer back to, what I've done is when people have resistance to change, I take them back to a moment in time when we had, say, a successful launch, right? And say, okay, when we launched this product, it was successful. Why do you think, it happened for us that way, that we had success with this product, right? What lessons can we learn, from that launch or that release, right? And let's apply it here. Is this applicable in this situation? Can we take the lessons or the retrospective we had or the key selling points we had at that point in time and apply it to this situation and see if it can, help us as well, That's one thing. But then also, there's also the human factor, right? Some people might be resistant, but if they hear the message from a different person, and I know this sounds very, sad to hear, but, if they hear from a third party, whether it's a customer or a different team member or a different leader, they can be like, okay, if you're saying this and he's saying that as well, maybe I'm, the person that should be thinking about things differently because, I'm hearing this from different people. There happens to be a consensus here. Maybe this is the way we should go, So I think just, looking at the situation and figuring out, should we look at the data? Should we get more people behind this? Sometimes that helps with people that are pretty much, resistant to change. Yeah.
So like managing your stakeholders, it's about people and data, knowing people, loving people, managing your relationship with people and knowing the right data, which to show to your stakeholders in the right moment. Guys, it was an amazing talk. Thank you very much for your time, efforts and sharing your experience. So Scott, Anthony, Pete, thank you for the great discussion. It was nice to meet you. I hope that we will, despite Corona, see you very soon in Ukraine and maybe next year on Real Life IT Arena. Thank you very much and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Hey, thank you so much.
So
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. And we are not switching off, we are staying here for a short pause to then jump into another speech. Thank you so much for sharing the experience with the stakeholders.
But Pete left.
Oh, okay. So I'm seeing, please stay with us.
Okay, let's wait for a second.
Whoa. So I think that we can switch.
Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Meet you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So we can switch to a short pause and then we are jumping into the Scott's speech about the customer obsession. So stay with us.
Canada, we didn't build the Berlin Wall, but we know how to build firewalls. Not only in Silicon Valley of the North, but from coast to coast, you will find global leaders and innovative startups in AI, VFX, quantum computing, gaming, virtual reality,